Architecture Codex. If you want to see more, like, comment, share, and most importantly, subscribe.
It was noted by architect Forrest Wilson that while the American Revolution won political independence from England, it did not win architectural independence. Federal design, often referred to as Georgian, as in King George, still dominated the American landscape. Both styles in America, Federal and Georgian, were subtle classical interpretations of standard English manors and townhouses, often in wood instead of brick or stone. It tended to build simple boxes with the occasional classical flourish, perhaps a single engaged pediment or a lantern on top. The larger buildings might be of brick, but they were still boxy. But then, one of the radicals from the Continental Congress decided to do something that was really revolutionary, and we see that best at the Rotunda at the University of Virginia. On his gravestone, Thomas Jefferson, the third president of the United States, lists his accomplishments as author of the Declaration of American Independence, of the Statute of Virginia for Religious Freedom, and father of the University of Virginia. He did not list his presidency, and two of the accomplishments were written documents that expanded the concept of freedom. Jefferson's works, with many others, brought to a political reality, albeit in its infancy, the enlightened idea that human beings were free because their rights came directly from God and not through some sovereign. This is compelling. Some critics will look at Jefferson and the early days of the United States and see nothing but the flaws, and there are some. But even if you take the erroneous, angry, and narrow view that the Declaration of Independence applied only to white men, that all white men were equal, that was still a revolution. Throughout history, in all human civilizations, it had been believed that the gods or God deemed certain people superior and ordained them to rule over everyone else. Struggles against such tyranny had succeeded in slow progress over eons. As part of the Enlightenment, led by people like Immanuel Kant, John Locke, and others, the Founding Fathers created the first, the most enduring, and best political manifestation of that belief, starting with those men in Philadelphia in 1776 and spreading ultimately to everyone. Some people enjoy looking at Jefferson's flaws as a way to denigrate his accomplishments. But we can do that to anyone. You can do that to me, you can do that to you. You can list all our flaws: the greed, the pride, the gluttony, the lust, the sloth, the wrath, and the envy. But can you add to that list of flaws and sins that, hey, I wrote the Declaration of American Independence? No, you can't. It's easy for the ignorant and the angry and the envious to destroy what came before them because they are unable to create joyfully something new and something better. And maybe their envy is a measure of their lack of merit. The University of Virginia was chartered by Thomas Jefferson in 1819, but schooling did not begin until 1825. The school is built on land in Charlottesville, purchased from James Monroe just as he became the 5th President of the United States. Most other colleges at the time were founded according to a single religious faith and offering degrees only in law, medicine, and theology. Jefferson School would be more scientific, de-emphasizing religion, which was perceived as discouraging free scientific inquiry. The University of Virginia would offer degrees in astronomy, botany, philosophy, political science, and architecture. There were no schools of architecture in the Western world until the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris started one in 1819, even though they began that school back in 1671. The architecture school was established around the same time as Jefferson's charter, so Jefferson may have expected to create the world's first architecture school and anticipated teaching it. The UVA School of Architecture claims its origin dates back to 1826 in concept when the program was established, but Jefferson died that year, significantly delaying its implementation. By 1919, when the UVA's architecture school officially began, many other colleges in the U.S. had already established their schools of architecture, teaching it as a profession rather than just an interest. Much has been made that Jefferson was untrained as an architect, but as I just noted, there was no such thing as a trained or licensed architect at the time, so I think that's an unnecessary designation. Jefferson was educated at the College of William and Mary and came to the profession through academic study instead of apprenticeship, which had been the primary method for the last 7,000 years. A visit to Monticello, or a quick sampling of any biography, and you will see that Jefferson had an inquiring mind. As a gentleman farmer, he had a great interest in botany. He loved gadgets, such as the polygraph, the writing duplicating device invented by John Isaac Hawkins. He even tinkered with a clock in the main entrance of his home. In an effort to extend the operating time, he lengthened the ropes for the weights that powered the timepiece, forcing him to cut holes in the floor. And while that was incredibly clever, if I did something like that, I would first be fired and then sued by my clients. The soft-spoken Jefferson was, despite the popular misconception, a theist, a believer in God, although he eschewed most formal religions. But he was also an accomplished man of letters, of science, and of art. This is why, in 1962, when President John F. Kennedy hosted a dinner for Nobel Prize winners, he commented, "I think this is the most extraordinary collection of talent, of human knowledge, that has ever been gathered together at the White House, with the possible exception of when Thomas Jefferson dined alone." Jefferson served as an American ambassador to France from 1784 to 1789. This was the height of Baroque and Rococo architecture in France, and so his exposure to the pinnacle of Western architecture was extreme, considering that both the Louvre and Versailles were functioning palaces at the time. But in 1787, he traveled to southern France and northern Italy, where it became obvious that he found inspiration for his agriculture and architectural visions. He traveled alone, incognito, sort of an 18th century motorcycle road trip in a horse-drawn carriage. He purchased many things, having them shipped to America, including plants, furniture, housewares, art, books, etc. He was so fond of buying European things that the 1803 Louisiana Purchase from France should not have been a surprise. While Jefferson made it only into Milan and Genoa, he did step deep enough into the Italian Renaissance that his architectural inspirations would be obvious. Because he did not get to Vicenza or Rome, the direct inspiration for the library at UVA and Monticello could not have been the Pantheon or Villa Capra, Architecture Codex video number 48. But the indirect inspiration was easily the buildings that had been inspired by those buildings, and just as likely the books about architecture. Jefferson himself said that Palladio's 4 books on architecture was his Bible, and he owned about 5 copies of it over his lifetime, including the 1715 edition in English. The book was the most essential tool in that first information age. It is perhaps not an accident that Jefferson was most attracted to Renaissance architecture instead of the other styles he might have seen in Europe. Gothic was too medieval. Baroque was associated with Catholic opulence, and Rococo was very much a part of the imperialist excesses. Jefferson, schooled in the classics at William and Mary, and having studied classical architecture, would have found Renaissance architecture as the fulfillment of his classical ideals, a pure Greco-Roman style. The concept of the Roman Republic inspired the founders, along with the philosophers of the Enlightenment, to create the government that was the United States of America. Jefferson saw such buildings as the ancient Roman temple, Maison Carrée, in Nimes, which was the inspiration for his sketches for the Richmond General Assembly building. When he traveled in London, he would have seen St. Paul's Cathedral. And perhaps the most influential was the Parisian Pantheon, started in 1758 and under construction by architect Jacques-Germain Soufflot while Jefferson was ambassador. Jefferson's architecture projects brought a purer form of Greco-Roman architecture to America, with grand colonnades and domes augmenting the vocabulary of the Federalist style. It predated the more formal Romantic Revival period in America, when all sorts of European styles of architecture were lusciously copied. While Jefferson's home in Monticello is more famous, its transformation to a Palladian style came later in its history. But the library at UVA was conceived after Jefferson's travel in Europe and would be the focus of his academical village, where knowledge in books and not a chapel would preside over the campus. And he wanted the library to be beautiful, not like the rude, misshapen pile akin to a brick kiln that he considered the main building at the College of William and Mary. Eventually, for his library, he came to the design of a mini Pantheon, which was kind of ironic because he only knew that building through books, having never seen the original. Jefferson worked closely with two professional architects, William Thornton and Benjamin Henry Latrobe. So the design was a collaboration, with the architects fleshing out Jefferson's concept and Jefferson in turn suggesting changes. The plans evolved by 1819 and were published in 1822 in what's called the Maverick Plan, after the engraver Peter Maverick. While many buildings were started under Jefferson's supervision, he handed over construction to the university proctors. The workforce, like most other in America at the time, included Irish and Italian-born craftsmen. The American-born craftspeople included whites, freed blacks, and the enslaved blacks, usually owned by one of the subcontractors. The campus we see today was restored after an 1895 fire by the architects McKim, Mead, and White, the epitome of classical and romantic revivalist architects, very much in the tradition of Jefferson himself. By the way, a couple of years earlier, Jefferson sold his entire book collection to the Library of Congress, so the book collection at UVA had to be started from scratch. From the library, 2 rows of pavilions were built, shifting from the Corinthian style on the library, considered the most ornate of Greek orders, back through Ionic and finishing at the southern end in the simple Doric capitals, which were the most ancient style. The campus was designed to be instructional in Greco-Roman architecture, much like the architecture building at the University of Notre Dame, Architecture Codex Video number 40. These pavilions were connected by an arcade. The intersection of the arcade and the building is at times awkward, but the power of the idea still comes through. Each pavilion was the face of a small grouping of buildings and gardens. In the front building were classrooms on the ground floor and the instructor's living quarters above. It was expected that the tenant teacher would develop and maintain the area behind for the gardens, the kitchens, the necessary, the slave quarters, the stables, the smokehouses, the pig pens, etc. The famous undulating walls of the gardens were a means to reinforce the strength of the wall so it would not tip over without having to make them thicker or to use any form of metal. The library rotunda was built in the manner of the Pantheon, featuring a Greek temple front with 6 Corinthian capital columns instead of 8. It sits on a platform created by a base building with inner courts, which not only elevates the rotunda above the ground, but provides ample ancillary space. Like the Pantheon, the main reading room is a single space with a dome over it. It even has the open oculus of the Pantheon, but here it is covered with glass. Unlike the Pantheon, which was poured concrete, the dome of the rotunda is wood-framed from oak beams as deep as 18 inches and nailed together. This is because the recipe for Portland cement was only being rediscovered at the time that the UVA rotunda was being built, and reinforced concrete construction would not really be used commercially for about another 50 years. The space, as designed by Jefferson and his team, is truly evocative of the original Pantheon, albeit about half the size. But it is safe to say that no such building like it existed on the American continent at this time. For Jefferson, the vision of UVA was part of his creation of an American republic, with education and practicality being among the primary virtues. The rotunda echoed that, being glorious, but without ostentation. And this rotunda inspired other buildings in the United States, including, naturally, the Jefferson Memorial. The UVA rotunda is quite simply a temple dedicated to books. On the other hand, when I took the tour years ago, the college student giving it inserted some modern collegiate attitudes regarding the design of the rotunda. The guide pointed out how the bookshelves were perpendicular to the circumference of the rotunda and went about explaining why. According to the guide, Mr. Jefferson liked to party, and when he partied, he did not like to see books. So with the shelves perpendicular to the circumference, he could stand in the center of the rotunda and not see any books. I politely held my tongue. First, the image of the quiet Mr. Jefferson partying like a frat boy seemed incongruous. In fact, the word party was not a verb in his day. Secondly, his fondness of books was such that I do not see his spirit being depressed by seeing books, as he might be downing a mug of grog while playing beer pong. Finally, there is a much more logical explanation, and that is, in the days prior to electric light, architects and builders knew how to optimize the use of natural light. And with the windows on the circumference of the rotunda, placed as they were, if the books were perpendicular between the windows, then the light could shine through the windows between the stacks and illuminate the center of the rotunda. But if, in spite of this explanation, you'd rather picture Thomas Jefferson wearing a UVA sports jersey with a Coors in each hand and yelling, "Free bird!" you go right ahead. I'm Michael Molinelli, and this is Architecture Codex.